Today we're going to be making Olaf from Frozen. I loved Olaf so much and was thrilled when I finally got to make an Olaf for my niece. So I'm just going to get right into it. To begin making Olaf, I started with mixing in some tylose or CMC with some fondant. This just makes it a little bit stronger and harder, but it also makes it dry out a lot faster. So you have to work a little faster before it dries out. I started making the face first. I just took a ball of fondant and began shaping the head. I'm using a little sponge here underneath so that the bottom of his head doesn't flatten out too much. I squished the bottom of his face to create a chin and the top of his head to make the top of his forehead. Olaf's cheeks are pretty wide right in the middle, so I left that as it was. I pushed down a bit at the top of his head to create a little socket for his eyes above where his nose will go. It always helps to keep a photo nearby. I kept one handy on my phone to always refer to. I knew once I cut out his mouth that I'd probably squish his head a lot by accident, so I just went ahead and did that now so that I could fix it before it dried out. I used my X-Acto knife and cut out an indent for his mouth so I could fill it in with black fondant. I used my little ball tool to smooth out the inside of his mouth and use my Dresden tool to bring up his smile a bit more. Make sure to smooth out his face along the way in case you indent or distort it in some way with your hands before it dries. I then cut out a small piece of black fondant to fill into the mouth. I just guessed the size here and smoothed it in with my ball tool and my Dresden tool. To make the eyes, I rolled out a small piece of fondant and used a small piece of plastic wrap to put over it. This actually just rounds out the edges a little bit more so that it looks more like a flattened ball. It also makes it easier to get out of the cutter and you don't get those frayed edges. I didn't have a circle cutter that was small enough, so I used a circle icing tip that I had. I cut out 2 circles and glued them on with some water. I made tiny black circles to put on as the pupils and glued those on with water also. I made a tiny little carrot nose out of some orange fondant and glued that right in the middle of the 2 eyes on the little bump that I created earlier. Then I used a straight edge fondant tool, but you could also use a knife for this, and just carved tiny little lines in it to make it look more like a carrot. I wanted his eyes to shine a bit, so I used some blue luster dust that I had, and with a very thin paintbrush outlined the white parts of his eyes a bit. You don't want to get too much blue all over the place, just around the edges. Then I rolled out a very thin piece of black fondant to stick around his eyes and glued those on just around the edges. But I didn't like the fact that they weren't showing very much, so I did it again a little bit thicker this time. I made Olaf's one tooth and stuck that into the middle of his mouth with some water. I then rolled out really thin pieces of brown fondant and used a very small amount of water to glue them on to look about the same on each side. Make sure not to use too much water or it'll show on his face. Oh, sorry, my head is in the way there, my bad. Then to make his body, I rolled out one small ball of white fondant for his chest and another bigger white ball for his bottom, as well as 2 smaller balls for his feet. Here I'm just trying to estimate where things will go and how they'll sit. I made little black balls for the coal pieces, but don't make them too perfect because Olaf's are a little bit jaggedy like rocks. I made sure to leave Olaf to dry overnight so that when I put the stick inside him, I didn't want to distort his whole head and body with my hand, so make sure he has enough time to dry. In the meantime, I made his arms by rolling out thin brown pieces of fondant and rolled a toothpick right into the middle with some water. Roll it around until it's thinly wrapped and use an X-Acto knife to cut off the excess. I then added 2 more fingers on each hand and let them dry. The next morning, once Olaf was dry, I used a long candy stick to measure out how Olaf would be standing on the cake. Olaf is going to be slanted and standing on one foot, so you'll need to inject the stick on an angle. I put the stick into his foot first and then shoved it right through his body. It went into his head a little bit, and then I decided to take the head off and add some more water to the base and then put the head back on so I had something to stick to. Make sure not to put the stick right through the top of his head. At this point, I inserted Olaf into a styrofoam dummy so that Olaf could dry standing upright. I added that sponge I was using earlier to the bottom for some extra support. Don't dig Olaf too far into the styrofoam dummy or else you'll have a hard time taking him out. And then to make sure that his foot wouldn't fall off, I put a toothpick right through it and stuck it right through his body. I added about half a toothpick to the top of his head and just covered it up with some brown fondant to make his hair. And then finally I added his arms to the sides of his body by pushing those toothpicks in as far as I could. And that's it! I think he turned out really cute, and the cake that I put him on also turned out adorable, and I will definitely be making that into a video very soon. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up, and be sure to check out my playlist of my other fondant toppers that I've made, and if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button. I also have links to my Facebook and Instagram pages in the description below. I'm trying my hardest to make videos for you guys every Tuesday, so see you next Tuesday. Take care, guys. Bye!